We are learning more about former President Trump's campaign to overturn the 2020 election. During its fifth public hearing yesterday, the January 6th committee heard testimony about how Trump pushed Justice Department officials to support his baseless allegations of election fraud. Chief election and congressional correspondent Robert Costa is on Capitol Hill with the latest for us. Robert, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning. This was a high-stakes hearing. Former top Justice Department officials from the final days of the Trump administration testified that ultimately even President Trump's own lawyers pushed back against his attempt to install an acting attorney general who was promoting claims of voter fraud, widespread claims. Those claims, of course, were false, and the president had been told they were false.
He was willing to sacrifice our republic to prolong his presidency.
The January 6th committee on Thursday turned to top leaders of President Trump's own Justice Department to build the case against him.
And then I said, well, Mr. President, you're right that I'm not going to allow the Justice Department to do anything to try to overturn the election.
Jeffrey Rosen became the country's top law enforcement official on Christmas Eve 2020 after Attorney General William Barr resigned, and Rosen quickly got a call from the president.
He thought the election had been stolen or was corrupt and that there was widespread fraud, and I had told him that our reviews had not shown that to be the case.
Rosen's deputy, Richard Donahue, remembered the president saying,
"What I'm just asking you to do is just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican Congressman."
Rosen refused, and within days, Trump pushed to replace him with Jeffrey Clark, a Trump loyalist and an environmental lawyer at the Justice Department. According to testimony, Clark planned to send certain states a controversial letter, falsely alleging that evidence of widespread election fraud existed. In a tense Oval Office meeting, Donahue warned Trump.
You could have hundreds and hundreds of resignations of the leadership of your entire Justice Department because of your actions. What's that going to say about you?
Ultimately, Trump didn't elevate Clark, who pleaded the fifth over 125 times in a committee deposition. Early Wednesday morning, federal agents searched Clark's home, seizing electronic devices.
By my count, at one point, 12 agents and two Fairfax County police officers went into my house, searched it for 3.5 hours. They took all of the electronics from my house. Yeah, I think this is highly politicized.
As Rosen insisted on the independence of the Justice Department.
The Justice Department gets out of the role that it's supposed to play. That's really bad for our country.
There was also a breaking development at the end of the hearing. The committee revealed that 5 House Republicans sought pardons during the final days after the Capitol attack. That list includes Matt Gaetz, Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Louis Gohmert, and Scott Perry. This is significant, the committee believes, because they believe it suggests these lawmakers might have felt they were in legal jeopardy, criminal jeopardy, for their roles in helping President Trump try to overturn the 2020 election.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. In fact, some of those lawmakers are pushing back and denying it, even though there are emails and all sorts of evidence. But I want to ask you about something that happened before the hearing. We learned that federal agents raided Jeffrey Clark's home and seized some electronic devices. What do we know about that?
Jeffrey Clark is this environmental lawyer from the Civil Division of the Justice Department during the final year of the Trump administration. He was someone who became almost a confidant of then President Trump in the final days, saying he had a plan to try to keep Trump in power. It boiled down to having Trump and others send a letter from the DOJ saying to Georgia officials, including the governor, Brian Kemp, that there was a lot of fraud in the election. These were baseless claims, but they were going to make them and hope that Georgia would somehow send another slate of electors to Washington to keep Trump in the White House. So he was key to this plan Trump had to use states and alternate electors as a means of holding on to the presidency. But ultimately, Clark couldn't get that job as acting attorney general. The president didn't want to risk, it appears, mass resignations inside the Justice Department.
So according to the testimony, there were a number of different sort of avenues that former President Trump was pursuing. And one of them had to do with voting machines. During the hearing, Congressman Kinzinger asked Jeffrey Rosen about Trump's efforts to try and get the Justice Department to seize voting machines. I want to play some sound.
Mr. Rosen, the president asked you to seize voting machines from state governments. What was your response to that request?
We had seen nothing improper with regard to the voting machines, and I told them that the real experts at that had been at DHS, and they had briefed us that they had looked at it and that there was nothing wrong with the voting machines. And so that was not something that was appropriate to do.
So there would be no factual basis to seize machines. Mr. Donahue,
I don't think there was legal authority either.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. This is not something that the federal government is typically responsible for. It would be states' government. What more did we learn about this?
This was part of Trump's effort for weeks, not just days, ahead of January 6th. He was working with his outside lawyer and longtime political advisor, Rudy Giuliani, and his associate, Sidney Powell, and the former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, to shine a spotlight on voting machines. Now these voting machine companies have since sued many people. They're in active litigation about these claims, saying they're totally false. But at the time, Trump believed, not on evidence in any way, that these voting machines were somehow rigged, and he wanted the Justice Department to do something. That's the refrain we keep hearing from so much of this testimony. Trump wanted people to, quote, do something, whatever it was, to help him have the cover to say the election was stolen.
And let me ask you about your tag there, about the list of lawmakers that we heard testimony pursued preemptive pardons. Is there any possibility of any sort of repercussions for something like that?
Well, one of the congressmen who sought pardons texted me, CBS News, last night, Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama, with his letter to a Trump advisor at the time. And he stated in the letter that he wanted pardons and he believed Democrats were going to come after him. What pardons often suggest is that people feel like the request for pardons suggests that people feel that they are in hot water legally, that they could face prosecution. Some people who request pardons often say it's not an admission of guilt, but legally the committee and others believe it does suggest a possible admission of guilt. This is something that's debated in legal circles. But it's clear that they felt that they were under scrutiny, potentially in trouble, and they wanted to see if the president could help give them that protection.
Lots of questions. I don't know if that answer covers it, but that's the answer he gave you, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you.